The screen glowed in a darkened courtroom, an oversized television wheeled in for evidence. On it lingered a single word, written in Netflix's rounded font, baby. The cursor blinked beside the profile icon, waiting, expectant. The camera of imagination tilted, zooming in closer, until the letters seemed to swallow the room. Cut. The sound cracked like thunder. A gavel slammed against polished oak. Bang. Not for murder, not for theft, but for something so absurd it was terrifying. The ownership of a Netflix profile named Baby. Clara Reynolds, 28 years old, sat frozen at the defense table. Her hands trembled as though the air itself weighed too much. Paper slipped from her grip, custody forms, screenshots, her lawyer's neatly tabbed exhibits. They fluttered down like exhausted birds. Opposite her, Ethan Cole, 30, ex-boyfriend, self-proclaimed rightful owner of Baby, rose to his feet. His chair screeched against the floor. He pointed across the room, fingers shaking more from fury than fear. That profile was mine. His voice cracked into a growl. She called me Baby first. The clerk gasped. A reporter scribbled so fast his pen tore the page. Higger's throat tightened. She bit her lip until a taste of iron spread across her tongue. A bead of blood welled where her teeth had cut too deep. She thought, I am not on trial for a crime. I am on trial for my memories. Ethan slammed his palm on the table so hard the microphones rattled. She doesn't deserve to keep that name, he shouted, voice raw. She was never Baby to anyone. The word echoed, bouncing against marble walls, staining the air with bitterness. The judge raised a hand for order. But Ethan's fury spilled faster than the gavel could strike. He flung his arm in a wild gesture, nearly toppling the microphone stand. Erase her name. Erase her. He screamed. His spit caught the courtroom light, falling like shards of glass. Clara flinched, shoulders curling inward. The whole gallery shifted uncomfortably, the spectacle towing the line between comedy and cruelty. The bailiff bent down, retrieving Clara's phone from the floor. On its black screen, cracked at the corner, a reflection shimmered. The brass nameplate of the presiding judge, Hun. Samuel Whitaker. The etched letters glowed faintly. For a heartbeat, as the screen tilted, those carved syllables merged with the digital word, Baby. Still open on Netflix. It was an accident of reflection. It was a prophecy of battle. The judge exhaled slowly, as if taming a storm with breath alone. Mr. Cole, he said, voice clipped, control yourself. This is a courtroom, not a playground. But the playground was exactly what it felt like. Two adults dragging the carcass of a dead relationship across polished oak floors, arguing over a digital nickname that had once been tender, now toxic. Reporters leaned forward, sensing history. Not a grand trial of politics or power. Something stranger, the absurdity of modern love colliding with the machinery of law. The youngest journalist whispered into her recorder. Day 1. They're suing over who gets the Netflix profile named Baby. Clara's mind raced. Every nerve in her body begged her to run, but her spine rooted into the chair. She watched Ethan through the blur of tears, yet behind her glassy eyes burned a calculation. She thought of the nights when a baby had meant warmth, when the profile was filled with rom-coms. They watched in tangled blankets. She thought of the mornings after the breakup, when she hovered over the delete button, unable to erase the only proof she had ever been chosen. Now that memory was evidence. And evidence was weapon. Order, the judge barked. The word S, baby, still glowed on the oversized monitor. Silence sank for a moment, thick, electric. Then Ethan leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dripping venom. She hijacked my account, weaponized my love. I demand the court restore what is mine. He jabbed a finger at the screen. That name, that identity. Wait, Baby belongs to me. Clara's chest heaved. For a second, she wanted to scream. To tell the court that maybe had been her nickname since childhood, that the streaming queue was more her diary than his collection. But her voice lodged in her throat. Instead, she whispered to herself, so faint only the wooden table heard. They're not trying me under law. They're trying me under memory. A reporter's flash popped like lightning, bleaching the room in white. Every camera pivoted from Ethan's theatrical rage to Clara's crumpled silence. The narrative was writing itself. Aggressor and victim, owner and intruder, truth and distortion. The absurdity only sharpened the pain. The judge sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This court is convened for case number 248, Cole versus Reynolds, regarding disputed ownership of a digital profile. He paused, almost embarrassed to speak the next words aloud. Specifically, a Netflix profile labeled Baby. Look, the gallery tittered, then hushed. Because, while the subject seemed laughable, the faces in the room were not. Clara's tears were real. Ethan's fury was real. And the law, however strange, was very much real. The bailiff adjusted his belt. The clerk steadied trembling hands over the transcript keys. The reporters sharpened their pens like knives. And at the defense table, Clara pressed her palms flat against the wood, forcing air into her lungs. She told herself, "This isn't about him. It's about me." About whether memory can be stolen. The cold open tightened its grip. The screen still glowed with Baby. The gavel gleamed with consequence. The courtroom leaned forward, waiting for the first cut into the absurd anatomy of love and law. The camera pulled back, blood on Clara's lip, spittle drying on Ethan's cheek, the brass plate of the judge. The frozen smile of Netflix's algorithm. The courtroom hummed with low voices, an undercurrent of disbelief and anticipation. The judge motioned for silence. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said, sliding his glasses up the bridge of his nose with a smirk that carried both boredom and disdain. "Please explain to the court why you believe you deserve exclusive rights to the Netflix profile labeled Baby." Ethan Cole rose like a soldier about to receive a medal. He smoothed the crease of his suit jacket and lifted his chin. "Because," he said, pausing for effect, "I built it. I paid for it. I named it. And he jabbed a finger toward Clara without looking at her, she stole it to humiliate me." His voice thickened, trembling not with weakness, but with the adrenaline of self-righteousness. "She lied to me?" Ethan said, pacing in the box like a caged lion. "She lied to Netflix." His eyes swept the room, then locked on the judge. "Lied to everyone." The words ricocheted off marble columns, sharper each time, until even the court reporter flinched at the repetition. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said smoothly, "what exactly did she lie about?" Ethan seized the invitation. His grin curled like smoke. "Everything." He spread his hands, as if offering the jury a gift. "We were together 7 years. 7. Every bill, every password, every plan, I paid. I gave her access to my world. She repaid me by claiming it as hers." He gestured toward the glowing screen still frozen on the word Baby. That name wasn't hers. It was mine. She never deserved it. She was just a guest. And now she's hijacked it to make me look like the fool. Clara's breath caught, but she stayed silent. Her eyes flicked from Ethan to the judge to the clerk. She was cataloging everything, committing every lie to an invisible ledger. Ethan straightened his tie, warming to his own performance. "Do you know what it's like, Your Honor, to see your history twisted?" he asked, voice softening into false vulnerability. "To see your identity hijacked by someone who never cared about the subscription? Only the power?" He leaned into the microphone. "She was never, Baby. She was a guest on my account. Baby is mine." The words landed like a hammer blow, a closing argument disguised as testimony. The prosecutor nodded as though satisfied. He folded his hands, but his smile carried a curl of cynicism. 7 years, you say?" he asked. 7 years, Ethan affirmed. "And you, of course, were the sole subscriber during that time?" "Yes." "And the sole creator of the HBP profile?" "Yes." Ethan puffed his chest, as though each yes restored another brick of his collapsing kingdom. The gallery murmured. Friends of Ethan's, seated in the second row, nodded in unison, loyal soldiers in an army of delusion. One smirked and whispered, Finally, he's getting his justice. The clerk at the side of the bench trembled. Her pen slipped from her hand, clattering onto the tiles. She bent to retrieve it, but her eyes flickered toward Clara. Something in that glance, a flicker of doubt, of sympathy, went unspoken. The judge scribbled notes. Reporters filled their pads, some with grins, some with disbelief. The absurdity was a headline. The emotion was a tragedy. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said, tilting his head, "in your testimony, you have repeatedly used the word lie. Why is that?" Ethan smirked. "Because that's what she is. A liar. She lied about loving me, lied about paying, lied about who she was. She lied to me. She lied to Netflix. He lied to everyone." The motif returned, louder, harsher. She lied, she lied, she lied. For the first time, Clara lifted her gaze. Not to rebut, not to defend, but to watch him. She studied his mouth, shaping the word lie, the rhythm of his voice, the arrogance in his stance. Her silence became its own testimony, a stillness that unsettled those who looked closely. "Oh," the prosecutor pressed. "And do you have proof of your exclusive ownership?" "My bank records," Ethan declared. "Every month, my card paid the bill. My name, my money, my account. And the profile creation? Me. I set it up. Day one." His certainty rattled like a saber. Then the prosecutor glanced at the clerk, who handed him a slim folder. He slid a document across the bench to the judge. "Exhibit B," the prosecutor said casually. "Account registration logs." Ethan squinted. The judge adjusted his glasses. "It says here, initial profile created from IP address 192, 78.92. Registered to Clara Reynolds' residence." The gallery stirred. Ethan's friends shifted in their seats. The clerk swallowed audibly. For a moment, Ethan froze. The performance cracked. But he recovered, slamming his hand on the railing. "Go!" he shouted. "That's wrong. She must have spoofed it. She's a hacker, a manipulator." "She?" The judge raised his gavel. "Enough." The detail was small, but it was a fissure, a seed of doubt. A whisper that perhaps the self-proclaimed victim was not the builder he claimed to be. The motif still echoed. She lied. But the word now carried a faint shadow. Or did he? Ethan's voice lowered, but the venom remained. "Don't let her fool you," he hissed. "She's cunning. She's rehearsed. She'll sit there silent, looking innocent. But it's an act. Every moment she's plotting. It was never baby. She was a parasite. I was the one they called baby." He spat the nickname like it was poison. Vera closed her eyes. She remembered the first night he called her that, an inside joke after a movie marathon. "You're my baby," he had said. It had felt tender then. Now it felt stolen. Her lips pressed together. Not yet. She would speak when silence became sharper than sound. "Quess," the prosecutor leaned back. He let Ethan's words linger, rot, fill the air with their stench. He didn't challenge further. The performance was spectacle enough. The judge finally sighed, tapping the gavel for order. "This court will consider the testimony. They remind both parties. Truth is not in who shouts loudest, but in what evidence remains." The words hung like a prophecy. Ethan folded his arms, convinced he had triumphed. His friends smirked, emboldened. But the clerk still trembled, her pen scratching uneven lines. She had seen something shift. And Clara, silent, eyes sharp, wrote every syllable into the ledger of her memory. Well, I had been told. The audience had nodded. The court had listened. But a fracture had formed, a crack in the mask. And through it, the truth waited, patient, inevitable. For nearly an hour, Clara Reynolds had sat in silence, letting Ethan Cole's voice dominate the courtroom. His words had filled every crevice. Accusations, repetition, venom. The gallery had swayed with him, nodding, smirking, believing. Now, at last, she rose. The scrape of her chair was so soft, yet the room shifted instantly, as though gravity had changed direction. She pressed her palms against the polished wood of the defense table. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her lips parted. And when she spoke, the courtroom froze. Under Section 230 of the Communications Act, Clara said, her voice low, measured, steady as a heartbeat. Digital identities, even nicknames, can constitute property when tied to user history. It was not loud, it was not dramatic. It was precise. And the precision cut sharper than any scream. Even the court reporter's keystrokes faltered. A woman in the back row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Odd. She sounds like a lawyer." Ethan laughed, too loud, too brittle. "She's bluffing," he barked. "She read that online, some Reddit nonsense. Don't let her trick you." But his fists tightened, knuckles whitening. Rage made his cheeks blotch crimson. His composure cracked against the calmness radiating from the woman he had tried to paint as powerless. Clara turned her gaze to the judge, not to Ethan. "Your Honor, I formally request a preservation order for the Netflix account in question. This would require the company to retain all data logs, viewing history, login records, IP addresses, until the court has reached its decision. Without it, the account holder could delete or alter the evidence before we conclude." Gasps rippled across the gallery. A preservation order was not the vocabulary of a helpless ex-girlfriend. It was the language of someone who understood the machinery of the law. The judge adjusted his glasses, studying her. "You're requesting a preservation order," he repeated slowly. "On what grounds?" Clara did not flinch. "On the grounds that this case revolves around the ownership of a digital identity. If the account's data is erased, the very identity under dispute will be destroyed. Without preservation, this court would have no evidence, only his word against mine." Ethan slammed his palm against the rail. "She's manipulating you. She's not even supposed to know those terms." The judge silenced him with a raised hand. For once, Ethan's outburst looked less like righteous fury and more like desperation. Clara's words carried no tremor. She didn't need volume. She had precision. "Justice isn't loud," she said, turning back to the gallery. Her eyes scanned the room, steady, unwavering. "Justice is precise." The sentence fell like glass shattering on marble. Soft, beautiful, final. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to a memory. A dorm room years ago. Her closest friend Anna sitting cross-legged on the bed, crying into her laptop. Anna's Spotify playlist, the one she'd curated since middle school, vanished overnight after an ex-boyfriend deleted it. Every song erased, every memory tied to each note stolen. Clara had sat beside her, helpless, as Anna whispered, "It's like he deleted me." That night, Clara swore she would never allow erasure to become power. Never again. Now, in this courtroom, that vow burned behind her calm. "Mr. Cole claims I was a guest," Clara continued, her voice never rising above conversation, yet every ear strained to catch it. "But guests do not shape the house they enter. Guests do not leave footprints in the halls. Guests do not fill every shelf." She gestured toward the evidence monitor, still frozen on the glowing word, "baby." "If I were a guest, then why does every recommendation read, 'Because you watched Grey's Anatomy'?" A ripple of laughter broke through the gallery, quick and nervous, but the line struck harder than humor. It was data as identity, proof, not in receipts, but in memories the algorithm itself had recorded. Ethan's face contorted, rage and panic battling for dominance. "She's twisting it. That's her show, not her name." "It doesn't prove anything." Clara tilted her head, her gaze sharp but calm. "It proves this," she said. "Identity is not claimed in speeches or tantrums. Identity is proven by history. And my history is written there, line after line, show after show. I am not a guest in that profile. I am the author of it." The judge leaned back, tapping his gavel softly against the block. "The court acknowledges the preservation request," he said. His eyes lingered on Clara longer than on any other witness so far. There was recognition there, not of her face, but of her posture, her fluency in the language of law. The gallery murmured again, different now. Less mockery, more awe. The prosecutor cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, "are you asserting ownership of the profile based solely on viewing history?" Clara smiled faintly. "Not solely. Ownership is demonstrated through multiple factors: creation, contribution, maintenance. But history is the backbone. Without history, a name is just pixels. With history, it becomes identity." Ethan shook his head violently, muttering under his breath, "Lies, all lies! She lied, she lied!" But the words no longer rang with conviction. They sounded like a mantra of fear. Clara's final line of testimony landed like a blade driven into stone. "If you believe I was only a guest," she said, her tone still unshaken, "then why does every recommendation say, 'Because you watched Grey's Anatomy'?" The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was pressure. The shift had happened. Courtroom knew it. Ethan's fury had been loud. Clara's truth was precise. And precision, once spoken, could not be unheard. The courtroom had sunk into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan's voice had grown shrill, his claims circling the same hollow drum. Clara's calm rebuttal had already shifted the ground beneath him, but still the gallery clung to the spectacle, uncertain which way the scales would fall. Then Clara reached into her briefcase. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. A ripple of whispers passed through the rows of spectators, as though everyone felt an invisible breeze before the storm. She withdrew a small leather wallet, worn at the corners, embossed with a seal that gleamed even in the dim light. The camera of imagination slowed. A shaft of fluorescent light slid across polished brass, illuminating 3 engraved words: United States Courts. For a heartbeat, the courtroom forgot to breathe. The acting judge, Samuel Whitaker, blinked once, then twice. The gavel in his hand hovered, suspended between authority and confusion. Clara held the wallet open, her fingers steady. Inside, the gold lettering of her federal attorney's card glimmered. Her name, Clara Reynolds, carved into law itself. She placed the card on the defense table with a quiet click. The sound was soft, yet it resonated like a cannon. The young clerk at the side of the bench fumbled her pen. It clattered to the floor, the echo sharper than expected. Papers fluttered. For one symbolic moment, the sound of the pen-striking tile was louder than Ethan's shouting, louder than the murmurs of the gallery. It was the sound of truth dropping into the room. Clara reached again into her case. This time, she unfolded black fabric, heavy and deliberate. The robe shimmered faintly as she lifted it, catching light along its seams. Gold thread embroidered at the collar winked like lightning in slow motion. She draped it across her shoulders. The fabric fell with a weight that was not only cloth but history, and when she spoke her voice shifted. Lower, resonant, carrying authority not asked but owned. "I am not just a user," she said, her tone measured yet thunderous in its restraint. "I am Judge Clara Reynolds, appointed to the Federal Court of Appeals." The gallery gasped as one, a wave crashing against marble. Reporters froze, pens mid-air. Cameras clicked furiously, trying to catch the impossible. The defendant transforming into the law itself. The presiding judge's eyes widened. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in his career, he looked like a man trespassing on his own bench. Ethan staggered back, knocking over his chair. "No," he hissed. "No, this is a trick. She's lying." The irony curdled in the air. The word "clying," once his weapon, now dissolved on his tongue like ash. You can't be a judge," he stammered. "You can't. You're just my ex." Clara turned, robe settling across her frame like the closing of a vault. Her gaze was no longer that of a defendant. It was the gaze of a judge measuring a sentence before speaking it. "Mr. Cole," she said evenly, "for too long, you mistook my silence for weakness. For too long, you mistook my patience for consent. But silence is not surrender. Patience is not permission." Her eyes flickered briefly toward the clerk, still crouched on the floor, pen in hand, wide-eyed. The girl looked up at her as though seeing the law for the first time. For years I judged silently, Clara thought. Now, I judge aloud. Ethan's face twisted, desperation hollowing his features. This is fraud. You can't just put on a robe and pretend you have power? But the robe was no costume. It was recognition. Authority woven into fabric. Clara stepped forward, the hem of her gown brushing against the floor. Each step was slow, heavy, inevitable. You came here as plaintiff claiming to be the victim, she said. But every word you spoke, every lie you layered, revealed not a victim, but a manipulator. Her voice deepened, the final verdict already taking shape in its cadence. You stand not as accuser, but accused. The gallery erupted in whispers, the tide turning visibly in the shifting eyes, the clenched jaws, the widened mouths. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing tomorrow's headline had just been rewritten. Ex-boyfriend, sues over. Netflix profile. Turns out defendant is a federal judge. Ethan gripped the railing, knuckles bone white. You can't do this, he whispered hoarsely. You can't flip it on me. But Clara's gaze didn't waver. You flipped it on yourself, she replied. Judge Whitaker, still stunned, finally managed a word. Judge Reynolds? His tone mixed disbelief with reluctant acknowledgement. Anna inclined her head. Yes, Your Honor. I recused myself from the bench the moment this case touched my life. But that does not erase who I am, or the authority vested in me by this nation. Today, I stand not to wield power, but to reclaim truth. The robe hung heavy on her shoulders, not as theater, but as memory. Every ruling she had ever written, every oath she had sworn, every sleepless night spent over transcripts, it all pressed down on her now. And yet, it steadied her spine. I stayed silent long enough, she thought. Tonight, I sit in the right chair. A clerk finally rose, pen clutched tight, tears glinting in her eyes. She whispered, barely audible, "Justice." The word drifted, fragile but undeniable, until the gallery picked it up, whisper by whisper, like wind fanning sparks into flame. Justice. Ethan shook his head violently, as though denial could change reality. She can't do this, he muttered again and again. She can't. But no one was listening. Court had shifted. The defendant was the judge. The plaintiff was the liar. The game had ended. The air in the courtroom had shifted since Clara revealed her robe. Authority clung to her voice like armor. Ethan's bravado had cracked, his protest thinning into hoarse mutters. Still, he clung to his last defense, denial. Clara folded her hands on the table, then looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I move to admit video evidence provided by Netflix's compliance team under subpoena, she said. Her tone was steady, the cadence of someone who had spent her life inside the language of law. These logs will demonstrate, beyond doubt, the history of the profile labeled Baby. Walter. They are unaltered. They are truth. The judge's brow furrowed. He glanced at the prosecutor. Any objection? The prosecutor hesitated, then shook his head. None, Your Honor. Very well, the judge said. He is admitted. The bailiff wheeled in a second monitor, larger than the first. The courtroom lights dimmed. The gallery leaned forward. On the screen, a Netflix dashboard bloomed into view. A cursor hovered over the profile icon, Baby, then clicked. The familiar rows of thumbnails filled the screen. Comedies, dramas, romances. The kind of cue that spoke volumes without words. The video froze, then zoomed into the corner where the timestamp glowed. August 3, 2016, 11:42 p.m.'s show. Grey's Anatomy device. iPhone. Registered to Clara Reynolds. The courtroom inhaled as one. Your me ass. The video continued. September 12, 2016. 2:17 a.m. show. Gilmore Girls device. MacBook. Clara's serial number visible in metadata. December 24, 2016. 9:33 p.m. Movie, Love Actually. Device. Smart TV. Logged from Clara's apartment address. Clip after clip flickered like memories stitched together. Nights of heartbreak and healing. Binge-watched marathons, comfort movies. each one stamped with Clara's name, her devices, her life. Ethan shifted in his seat, sweat glistening at his hairline. He rubbed his palms against his trousers, but the friction only made the fabric darker. Clara stood, pointing gently toward the screen. These are not random shows. These are my shows. My late nights, my escapes, my memories preserved in pixels. The video shifted again, March 7, 2017. 8 SV PMs. Show. The Crown device. iPad. IP address traced to Clara's office. Wi-Fi. June 15, 2017. 10:11 p.m. Show 13 Reasons Why E. Device. Roku, location, Clara's apartment. Each entry was another hammer strike against Ethan's wall of lies. The screen split into graphs, neat and merciless. Bars climbed and fell, each labeled by percentage. Clara's voice cut through the silence. 72% of this account's history belongs to my viewings. 7 out of every 10 hours streamed. That is identity. The number hung in the air like smoke, inescapable. Reporters scribbled furiously. The clerk's fingers shook as she typed, eyes darting from the graphs to Clara's face. Ethan's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. A clip played, October 31st, 2018. 9:48 p.m. Show, Stranger Things. Device. Clara's laptop. The screen paused on the glowing timestamp. Then another clip. Then another, each one louder than words. Ethan fumbled for the water bottle on his desk. Fingers slipped. The bottle toppled, clattering to the floor. Clink. The sound rang sharper than it should have, echoing across marble and oak. It was the sound of something breaking. The gallery turned. Reporters raised their eyebrows. Even the bailiff's stoic face twitched. Clara did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply spoke. "Your lies collapse under the weight of data," she said, each syllable like a nail driven into wood. She turned, eyes locking on Ethan. "Tonight, so do you." "No," Ethan whispered, shaking his head. No, this is manipulated." She hacked it. She forged those logs. The prosecutor frowned, uncomfortable now. "Mr. Cole, these records were subpoenaed directly from Netflix's compliance department. They carry digital certificates of authenticity. Unless you are accusing the corporation itself of fraud." "I am," Ethan snapped, voice cracking. "They're covering for her. They're in on it." The gallery chuckled nervously. His outburst, once intimidating, now sounded unhinged. Clara merely adjusted her robe. Silence had become her ally, her restraint a mirror that magnified his unraveling. The video rolled one final time. December 25th, 2019. 6:12 a.m. Movie. The Polar Express device. Smart TV. Clara's parents' home, Christmas morning. Clara's voice softened. "This was the morning I watched with my little niece. She was 4 years old. She climbed into my lap and asked, 'Can baby watch with me?' She didn't know baby was me. But the profile did. Netflix did. Memory did." Her eyes swept the room. Profiles are not property of convenience. They are archives of self. They are diaries in thumbnails. This account does not tell Ethan's story. It tells mine. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. He studied Ethan, then Clara, then the screen filled with data, graphs, timestamps, and memories. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice heavy, "do you have any evidence to dispute these records?" Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came. His hands trembled. His knees knocked against the table. No, he stammered. "She tricked me. She." But no one was listening anymore. The clerk's fingers flew across the keys, recording every word. Reporters circled like vultures, hungry for the final collapse. Clara's voice sealed it. "Your lies collapse under the weight of data. And tonight, so do you." Ethan slumped into his chair. The water bottle rolled in a lazy circle on the floor, finally still. The gavel struck. Bang! The evidence was in. and the lies were gone. The courtroom still trembled from the weight of the evidence. Ethan Cole sat broken, his lies scattered like shards across the floor. Yet Clara Reynolds did not sit down. She remained standing, robe draped across her shoulders, eyes locked on the gallery as though she were about to deliver not just a verdict, but a revelation. She took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a new rhythm. This case, she said, was never only about a Netflix profile. It is not merely about a nickname or about two people who once shared a subscription. Yes, is about ownership. This is about identity, and it is about how fragile our digital selves truly are. Her words spread through the gallery like ink in water. Clara paused, then let her voice harden. This isn't a personal feud, she declared. This is design. A system that erases identity with a single click. On the screen, new slides appeared, provided by her legal team, now activated with a nod. They weren't emotional this time. They were numbers. Mini. Infographic, text only, glowing white against black. DIS, 43% of divorces in the United States involve disputes over shared digital accounts. Chu AG. AG 6-7% of victims permanently lose access to profiles, playlists, or libraries that contain years of personal history. The gallery stirred. A murmur of recognition passed through them. Statistics made the story more than Clara and Ethan. It made it about everyone. Clara's voice dropped softer, more intimate. We are not just users. We are owners of our digital selves. When you strip someone of their history, their playlists, their watch lists, their reading logs, you are not deleting data. But you are erasing a diary. You are burning photographs. You are silencing memory. A hand rose from the back of the gallery. A woman, middle-aged, cheeks streaked with tears, clutched a folder to her chest. Permission was silently granted, and she stood, trembling. "My daughter," the woman said, voice quivering. "She was 7 when my ex-husband changed the password. All her cartoons, all the movies we watched together, gone. She cried every night for weeks. She kept asking me, 'Mom, why did Netflix forget me?'" The words pierced the courtroom. Several reporters dropped their pens. The clerk covered her mouth with her hand. Clara nodded gently toward the woman, then turned back to the gallery. "These," she said softly, "are not just percentages. They are people erased." The screen shifted again, displaying anonymized testimonials from affidavits. E.N. "My fiancé deleted our shared Spotify account the week after we broke up. 10 years of playlists banished. H. I lost custody of my Kindle library during divorce proceedings. Hundreds of books I had highlighted for research, gone. S. My ex deleted my photo backups from our shared drive. It was like losing my family twice." Sixie Clara raised her hand, steady and firm. "This court must understand. Digital identity is no longer trivial. It is foundational. It is memory. It is selfhood. And our system of law, written in a world of paper and locks, has not yet caught up to a world where memory lives behind passwords and cloud servers." The gallery was utterly silent now. Even Ethan's shallow breathing seemed too loud. Clara continued, her voice gathering force. "We legislate the protection of houses. We legislate the protection of cars. We legislate the protection of names on deeds and contracts. But what about names on profiles? What about identities that exist entirely online? Shouldn't the law recognize that a streaming queue, curated over years, is as personal as a journal? Shouldn't the law see that digital erasure is psychological erasure?" She looked directly at the judge. "Because if we do not, then every child who asks why Netflix forgot them, every spouse who watches their playlists vanish, every scholar whose notes are wiped, will remain unprotected, invisible." Another number appeared on the screen. H digital account disputes cost. Americans 2.3 billion annually in lost purchases, subscriptions, and duplicated media. The figure glowed, heavy and undeniable. Clara gestured toward it. $2.3 billion. But money is not the point. The point is dignity. The point is memory. Or, the point is identity. A young reporter, barely 22, muttered under her breath into a recorder. This isn't just about baby. This is about all of us. Clara stepped closer to the bench, her robe brushing the marble floor. Her voice steadied into a crescendo. Do not mistake the absurdity of the subject for the triviality of the harm. Today it is Netflix. Tomorrow it is medical records, school transcripts, banking identities. The question before us is not who owns baby. The question is whether we, as a society, will protect the digital self the way we protect the physical one. The gallery erupted in murmurs of agreement, heads nodding, pens racing. Even the prosecutor, who had earlier smirked at Clara's restraint, now stared at her with something like respect, and maybe unease. Clara lowered her gaze, her tone softening again. When I was a law student, I watched a friend lose her entire music library because her ex deleted their shared account. She cried, not for the songs, but for the years she could never reassemble. That night, I promised myself, when I had the chance, I would fight for the recognition of digital dignity. She looked up again, steel returning to her eyes. Also tonight is that chance. The room felt electric, charged with something larger than the case itself. It was no longer Ethan versus Clara. It was people versus the system that had never cared to protect them. The mini infographic glowed one last time. H43% divorces involve digital accounts. Tagging 2. IS 7% lose access permanently. Vista 223B, lost annually. Tay. Clara's final words of the section fell like scripture. These are not numbers. These are lives. And unless the law evolves, these lives will continue to be erased with the click of a button. The air in the courtroom had become dense, charged, as though even oxygen paused to listen. Ethan Cole slumped in his chair, his face pale, his lies scattered across the record like broken glass. Clara Reynolds, robe draped across her shoulders, stood at the center, not merely a defendant, not merely a survivor, but a voice about to carve itself into history. The judge tapped his gavel softly. Judge Reynolds, he said, formally acknowledging her title now. You may deliver your closing statement before this court renders judgment. Alara stepped forward. Her eyes swept the gallery. Reporters, clerks, strangers, the trembling woman with the crying daughter, the young clerk still clutching her pen like an anchor. She inhaled. And then she began. I was silent, Clara said, her voice steady but fierce, when my name was erased. The gallery leaned closer. I was silent when my memory was deleted. A hush spread. Even the bailiff forgot to breathe. I was silent when my love was mocked. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, who shrank further into his chair. I will be silent no more. The words struck like thunder, each repetition piling onto the last, until the silence that followed was heavier than the speech itself. The presiding judge, Samuel Whitaker, adjusted his glasses, nodding slowly. His pen scratched across the paper in front of him. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Judge Clara Reynolds, he declared. The plaintiff, Ethan Cole, is found guilty of perjury and malicious prosecution. He is fined and is hereby prohibited from accessing or attempting to access the Netflix account in question. A ripple spread through the gallery, gasps, then cheers, then applause. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Reporters scrambled to draft the line. Ex-boyfriend sues over Netflix profile. Loses to federal judge. But Clara wasn't finished. She raised the thick folder of evidence, the logs, the affidavits, the statistics, and held it above her head. Justice, she said, her voice cutting through the applause, is not a gavel. The room stilled again, waiting. Justice is a memory that refuses to be deleted. The sentence landed like prophecy, destined to outlive the trial itself. Ethan buried his face in his hands. His body shook, not with rage this time, but with collapse. He muttered something incoherent, fragments of denial that dissolved into the air. The bailiff approached, laying a hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward the door like a man already fading from relevance. His friends in the gallery avoided his eyes. The nods and smirks that had once bolstered him had vanished, replaced with silence, shame, and the awkward shuffle of those who backed the wrong cause. The gallery erupted again, this time in a standing ovation. Reporters clapped, strangers clapped. Even the woman whose daughter had lost her cartoons pressed her palms together until her knuckles went white. The young clerk, who had trembled through every testimony, stood on shaking legs. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She raised her notebook high, voice breaking but clear. "This," she cried, "is why I'll become a lawyer." The words rippled through the room, echoing the anaphora that had just shattered centuries of silence. The gavel struck once more, a final punctuation mark. "Justice is not a gavel-striking wood," Clara repeated softly, almost to herself. "It's a memory that survives the strike." Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing that sentence would become tomorrow's headline, then next year's quotation, then a line etched into textbooks. The cameras kept flashing, but Clara didn't pose. She didn't smile. She only stood, robe heavy on her shoulders, eyes lingering on the gallery. The people who had seen her erased, who had seen her restored, who now saw themselves in her fight. The young clerk sobbed openly now, clutching her notebook against her chest. "This is it," she whispered again. "This is why." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. "For years, I judged silently. Tonight I judged aloud. The verdict wasn't only against Ethan. It was against erasure, against silence, against every lie told louder than the truth. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a chamber of law. It was a cathedral of memory. The verdict echoed long after the gavel fell. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The gallery buzzed with the thrill of witnessing something historic. But as the courtroom emptied, the consequences of the trial began to crystallize, each ripple spreading into lives far beyond Clara and Ethan. Ethan Cole left the courthouse surrounded, not by supporters but by silence. The friends who once nodded at his every word now avoided his gaze. His phone buzzed with notifications. News headlines declaring his lawsuit, frivolous, commentators mocking his arrogance. By evening, the court clerk had updated the digital docket. His name would forever carry the mark. Frivolous claim. Sanctioned. The humiliation deepened when Netflix announced, in a terse corporate statement, that Ethan Cole's primary account had been permanently banned for policy violations. 7 years of watch history, gone with a keystroke. A symbolic erasure, the very fate he had tried to inflict on Clara. He had wanted the world to call him baby. Instead, they called him fool. Chi. Clara Reynolds, meanwhile, walked down the courthouse steps, not as a defendant, but as a symbol. Microphones swarmed, journalists shouted, but she spoke only a few words before retreating into the night. Justice is a memory that refuses to be deleted. By morning, those words were trending on every platform. Law schools across the country emailed faculty with subject lines like, "Add Reynolds verse. Cole to next semester's syllabus." Professors of digital rights and civil liberties dissected her arguments, praising how she had reframed streaming profiles as personal identity. In a world where most thought of Netflix queues as disposable, Clara had transformed them into legal battlegrounds. She was no longer just Judge Reynolds. She was the face of digital justice. 2 weeks later, Clara received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Inside was a note from a young man in Ohio. "Dear Judge Reynolds, 2 years ago, my girlfriend deleted our shared Spotify account after we broke up. I lost playlists I'd been building since high school. I felt stupid grieving over songs, but it was 10 years of my life. When I read about your case, I realized I wasn't crazy for caring. You gave me courage to sue. Yesterday I filed. Thank you." Clara folded the letter carefully, placing it between the pages of her notebook. It wasn't victory she felt, more like quiet validation. Her fight had already outgrown her. Back in the courthouse, the young clerk who had dropped her pen during the reveal began filling out law school applications. On her personal statement she wrote, "I watched a judge reclaim her identity in the face of erasure. I watched data become dignity. That day, I decided I will fight for digital rights. That day, I found my calling. She mailed the envelope with trembling hands, whispering, "This is why I'll become a lawyer." Months later, the courthouse unveiled a new plaque above the chamber where the trial had unfolded. Crowds gathered for the ceremony, reporters rolling cameras as the sheet was pulled away. The inscription gleamed, "The Hall of Digital Justice." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Memory is identity." Visitors stopped to read it, whispering as though in a museum. School groups toured the hall. Professors pointed to the plaque, explaining how a Netflix profile had rewritten the language of law. Ethan faded from the news cycle, but not from the consequences. Employers Googled his name and saw the scarlet letters, "Frivolous Claim." His social media accounts, once full of curated confidence, became deserts of derision. Even his dating profiles were bombarded with screenshots of headlines mocking him. He had tried to claim baby. He ended up erased from the very digital world he once controlled. For all her triumph, Clara carried a quieter weight. One evening, after giving a lecture on digital dignity at Yale Law, she sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the glow of her laptop. The AP profile still greeted her whenever she logged in. She whispered to the empty room, "I won. But I also lost years believing silence was safety." Her reflection in the dark screen looked older than she remembered. The rope had given her authority, but silence had cost her time. And time, unlike data, could not be restored. Across the country, couples in breakups began negotiating over not just houses and cars, but Hulu and Spotify, Disney Plus and Dropbox. Judges referenced Reynolds v. Cole as precedent. Lawmakers drafted proposals for digital custody acts. The absurd had become foundational. The trivial had become transformative. At a cafe in Seattle, a woman told her friend, "I thought I was silly for crying when my ex deleted our Google photos. But then I read about Judge Reynolds. It made me feel seen." At a university in Boston, a professor told her students, "Never underestimate the law's ability to grow." Once it ignored slaves as people. Once it ignored women as voters. Now it ignored digital selves. Until Reynolds v. Cole, Clara returned once more to the Hall of Digital Justice. She stood before the plaque, tracing the words with her fingers. "Memory is identity." Behind her, the young clerk, now accepted into law school, walked with a notebook under her arm. "I'll take it from here," the clerk said softly. Clara smiled. "Make sure no one else has to fight this battle alone." Together they stood in silence, the marble echoing with footsteps of visitors, the plaque glowing like a quiet beacon. The aftermath was not only a verdict, it was a legacy. The courthouse doors opened with a groan of weight and history. Outside, the plaza was alive with chaos, reporters jostling for position, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones thrust forward like spears. Clara Reynolds emerged slowly, the black robe still draped across her shoulders. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the fire of someone who had just fought not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been erased. The crowd surged. Shouts filled the air. "Judge Reynolds, how do you feel? Clara, do you regret the fight? What's next for digital rights?" She raised one hand, and the noise subsided into breathless silence. "Silence only feeds injustice," Clara said, her voice ringing against the marble walls. "Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story, so no one ever loses their digital identity again." The flashes strobed brighter, but she did not blink. She turned her gaze, not to the reporters, but straight into the nearest camera lens, as though speaking not to the press but to every living room, every phone, every person watching. Her tone softened, but sharpened too. "If you're watching this," she said, "maybe someone deleted your name. Maybe they erased your shows. Maybe they erased your history. Hear me now, you still count. You're not deletable. Share this story." The murmurs grew into a hum. The gallery of press shifting on its feet, realizing this was no ordinary press statement. It was a manifesto. Clara continued, her words paced like heartbeat strikes. "Urgency, actions have consequences. And today, consequence streamed back as justice." The sentence landed like a stone in water, rippling outward, already destined to be quoted in headlines, hashtags, protest signs. She stepped forward, closer to the cameras, closer to the audience beyond them. Her eyes seemed to pierce the screen. For years, I believed silence was safety, she said. That if I let my memories be erased, if I let my identity be stolen, it would hurt less than fighting. I was wrong. Silence is not safety. Silence is surrender, and no one should be forced to surrender who they are. She paused, letting the words breathe. Then she lifted the folder she had carried from the trial, filled with logs and affidavits, the paper embodiment of her fight. Back up your names, she urged. Glitter. Back up your proof. Back up your life. The reporters erupted, questions firing like bullets. But Clara had said what she needed to say. She closed the folder and held it against her chest, a shield and a testament. Then she turned once more to the cameras, one final glance into the lens, breaking the last wall between the courtroom and the world. This was my case, she said. It is your story. Protect it, share it, make sure no one ever again has to ask why Netflix forgot them. With that, she stepped away, flashes exploding behind her, her words already traveling faster than light. Streaming into history,